भागवतम की जय। निताय गौर प्रेमानंदी। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरये। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिके। Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 19, text number 20-25. Saha tatra nirmukta samasta sangha satatra nirmukta samasta sangha satatra nirmukta samasta sangha atmanubhutya vidhuta trilingaha atmanubhutya vidhuta trilingaha atmanubhutya vidhuta trilingaha pare amale brahmani vasudeve pare male brahmani vasudeve pare male brahmani vasudeve lebhe gatim bhagavatim pratitaha lebhe gatim bhagavatim pratitaha lebhe gatim bhagavatim pratitaha satatra nirmukta samasta sangha atmanubhutya vidhuta trilingaha pare male brahmani vasudeve lebhe gatim bhagavatim pratitaha satatra nirmukta samasta sangha atmanubhutya vidhuta trilingaha pare male brahmani vasudeve lebhe gatim bhagavatim pratitaha satatra nirmukta samasta sangha atmanubhutya vidhuta trilingaha pare male brahmani vasudeve lebhe gatim bhagavatim pratitaha satatra nirmukta samasta sangha atmanubhutya vidhuta trilingaha Pare Brahmane Vasudeve Leve Gatim Bhagavatim Pratitaha Saha Maharajayati. Tatra, upon doing this, Nirmukta was immediately liberated from Samasta Sangaha, all contamination, Atma Anubhutya, simply by understanding his constitutional position. Vidhuta was cleansed of Trilingaha, the contamination caused by the three modes of material nature. Sattva Guna, Rajo Guna and Tamo Guna. Pare, unto the transcendence. Amale, without material contact. Brahmani, the Supreme Lord. Vasudeve, Vasudeva, Krishna, the Absolute Truth. Bhagavan, Lebhe, achieved. Gatim, the destination. Bhagavatim, as an associate of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Pratitaha, famous. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Translation. Because King Yayati completely surrendered unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva, he was freed from all contamination of the material modes of nature. Because of his self-realization, he was able to fix his mind upon the transcendence, Parabrahman, Vasudeva, and thus he ultimately achieved the position of an associate of the Lord. Please repeat this translation after me. Because King Yayati completely surrendered unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, he was freed from all contamination of the material modes of nature. Because of his self-realization, he was able to fix his mind upon the transcendence, Parabrahman, Vasudeva, and thus he ultimately achieved the position of an associate of the Lord. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The word Vidhuta, meaning cleansed, is very significant. Everyone in this material world is contaminated. Karanam gunasangosya. Because we are in a material condition, we are contaminated either by Sattva-guna, by Rajoguna, or by Tamoguna. Even if one becomes a qualified Brahmana in the mode of goodness, Sattva-guna, he is still materially contaminated. One must come to the platform of Shuddha Sattva, transcending the Sattva Guna. Then one is Vidhuta Trilinga, cleansed of the contamination caused by the three modes of material nature. This is possible by the mercy of Krishna. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.2.17, Shrinvatam swakatha Krishnaha punyashravana kirtanaha hridyantasto hyabhadrani vidunoti suhrit satam. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, super soul in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. A person trying to be perfectly Krishna conscious by hearing the words of Krishna from Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita certainly has all the dirty things cleansed from the core of his heart. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also says, Cheto Darpana Marjanam. The process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Supreme Lord washes away the dirty things accumulated in the core of the heart. As soon as one is freed from all the dirt of material contamination, as Maharaj Yati was, one's original position as an associate of the Lord is revealed. This is called Swarupa Siddhi or personal perfection. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Prachare Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatari Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langhayate girim Yat kripatamaham vande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam Yat kripatamaham vande Paramananda Madhavam Yat kripatamaham vande Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya evacha Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So here is a description how King Yayati achieves liberation. It's an extraordinary event in the life of a person who was so very attached to sense enjoyment and utilized his position even as the emperor to indulge in so much of sense enjoyment. But the most surprising thing is that because he surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva, he immediately became completely purified. Therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, after speaking so many different instructions, he tells Arjuna, now you hear my topmost instruction and my most confidential instruction. Sarva guhyatamam bhuyaha. Sarva guhyatamam, the most confidential instruction. Now, this is interesting because the entire 9th chapter is entitled the most confidential knowledge. Now, the most confidential instruction is even more important than most confidential knowledge. Because somebody may have knowledge, the most confidential knowledge, but unless they act on that knowledge, they are not going to get the benefit of that knowledge. So, after speaking the most confidential knowledge, Krishna in the last verse of the 9th chapter, he gives that most confidential instruction. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. All the verses, 33 verses, Krishna is going on talking about most confidential knowledge. So what should you do after hearing this most confidential knowledge? Action. Whenever we have meetings, we discuss so many things. Ultimately, there is something called action item. Okay, what are we supposed to do? Who is supposed to do what? Then if there are many members in the meeting, we'll say, this particular member will do this. This particular member will do this. This particular member will do this. If that doesn't happen, everybody will say, yeah, very nice discussion we had. No action resulting from that. To some extent, in our culture, it has become like people know so many things about the Vedas, about Dharma Shastras, about the Puranas, but in their own life, what is the action resulting from knowing all this? Where is the action? They know it is very important to chant regularly. But are they chanting regularly? May not be. Maybe chanting sometimes. They know it is important to get up early in the morning. But do they get up every day early in the morning? May not be. Maybe getting up sometimes. When we visit Tirumala, we get up early in the morning and go for early morning darshan. On Janmashtami day, we come to ISKCON for Mangalarati, 4:30 a.m. So, the fact is that in this material world, because as is mentioned here, because of the contamination of the 3 gunas, including a Brahmana who is situated in Sattva guna, having all Brahmanical qualifications, he is also contaminated by Sattva guna. Because of which, what is lacking ultimately is surrender to Krishna. Brahmana has come up to the point where he should surrender to Krishna. So Krishna says, supposing somebody is not able to come to the point of Sattva Guna, they are situated in Tamoguna and they are struggling to rise above Tamoguna, to Rajoguna, above Rajoguna, to Sattva Guna. Big struggle for them. Krishna says, don't, bother about that struggle if you are unable to come to that point of Sattva Guna. That is the confidential knowledge in the 9th chapter. What does it say? Mami partha vyapashritya yepi syu papayonayaha. Those who take shelter in me, though they be of lower birth, women, Vaishyas, Shudras, and even those who are sinful people, all kinds of sinful people. If they take shelter of Krishna, how should they take shelter of Krishna? Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Then what happens? Mame vaishyasi. Not that by doing all this, you will come from tamoguna to rajoguna, rajoguna to sattva-guna. No! You are directly cleansed of all contamination. Sattva-guna, rajoguna, tamoguna, everything is cleansed. Wholesale cleansing. And the result is Mame Vaishyasi Yuktva Atmanam Matparayanaha. And this is the most important instruction. It's so important that Krishna repeats it. Therefore, in the 18th chapter, he repeats this by telling Sarva Ghuryatamam Bhuyaha. Bhuya means I am repeating. I am repeating. Bhuyaha means I am telling you again. The most confidential instruction. So what is that? Before even telling what it is, he is telling, now listen carefully because this is my topmost instruction. What is the next line of that verse? 64th verse. No. Sarva guhyatamam bhuyaha shunume. Listen carefully. Why? Shunume paramam vachaha. This is my topmost instruction. I've given so many instructions in Bhagavad Gita in earlier chapters. Yajnarthat karmanaha anyatra lokoyam karma bandhanaha. Yajnashishtashinas santo muchyante sarvakilvishin. So many instructions are given. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. But this is my topmost instruction, my final instruction. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. And this, that 64th verse also, Krishna says, Ishtosi me, because you are my very dear friend. Very dear friend. Ishtosi me, you are very dear to me. Dridamiti. You're not just dear to me, you are very, very, very dear to me. Ishtosi dridamiti. Tato vakshami tehitam. Therefore, I am speaking to you for your benefit. Tehitam, for your benefit I am speaking. What is that? Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi. He is repeating. You will directly come to me. Otherwise, throughout, the yoga systems or the yoga practice has been described as a process of purification. So this purification business, tamoguna means One gets purified, comes to Rajoguna platform. Then you have to act on the Rajoguna platform appropriately to come to the Sattva-guna platform. Then act properly on the Sattva-guna platform to come to the Shuddha Sattva, the transcendental platform. And on the transcendental platform, one has to engage in spiritual activities. What happens to these people who are on the gradual path of progress? If they are not devotees engaged in devotional service, then they gradually rise and somewhere they will get stuck up. Especially if they have come to Sattva Guna, they'll get stuck up. Then they don't make any further progress. Krishna wants that in the Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter. 14th chapter is a very important chapter. Because he says in the beginning of the 14th chapter, again I shall declare to you the supreme wisdom. See, again and again Krishna stresses the supreme wisdom. Supreme wisdom is Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Surrender to me. Always think of me. Become my devotee. Worship me. Bow down to me. Bow down to me means surrender to me. That's the meaning of bowing down. I am surrendered to you. So, to repeat that, he repeats in every chapter after the 9th chapter. Every chapter he repeats this. Uh, 10th chapter, he speaks the most 4 essential verses of the entire Gita. That is the repeating that 9th chapter last verse. In the 11th chapter, Bhaktya tu ananyaya shaktya aham evam vido Arjuna jnatum drashtum cha tatvena praveshtum cha parantapa mat karma krin mat paramo mat bhakta sangavarjitaha nirvaira sarva bhukteshu yassa mameti. Comes back to me. Mameti. The engaging in my devotional service. It comes back to me. 11th chapter. 12th chapter directly is talking about devotional service to Krishna. Levels of devotion. He talks of levels of devotion. Again, he talks about pure devotional service. And ye tu dharmamritam idam. Go to that last verse of the 20th chapter, 12th chapter. Ye tu dharmamritam idam yathoktam paryupasate. He who follows this imperishable path of devotional service, who completely engages himself with faith, Shraddhadhana Matparama, making me the supreme goal. Bhaktaste ativa me priyaha. Such a devotee is very, 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 very dear to me. So he's stressing the same point which he said in the 9th chapter, last verse. 13th chapter also, the same stress is given about pure devotional service, that in the process of knowledge, the process of knowledge culminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Supreme Personality of God. The most important item among the 20 items of knowledge is, Prabhupada says that here, in the beginning of the purport. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 10th verse, the 9th verse actually. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So if one does not approach or is unable to approach the transcendental service of the Lord, the other 19 items are of no particular value. See how the stress is given, even among the process of knowledge. All should lead to unalloyed devotionals. Mai cha ananya yogena bhakti avyabhicharini. That is the 13th chapter. 14th chapter, again, the stress is to transcend the modes. And for transcending the modes, he says, Mam chayo avyabhicharena. Again, the same thing is being stressed. Bhakti yogena sevate. Sagunan samatityetan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. We immediately transcend the three gunas simply by engaging in unalloyed devotional service to Krishna. So how does one take up unalloyed devotional service to Krishna directly? That is described beginning from the 15th chapter. The yoga of the Supreme Person. So he describes how we are badly entangled in this material world in 15th chapter. And it is very difficult to come out of this entanglement. So in the 5th verse, he says, one who knows how to surrender unto the Supreme Person attains to that eternal kingdom. You get out of this material existence when you surrender. You know how to surrender and actually surrender. And Prabhupada says that the surrendering process is described very nicely. But then again, if somebody tries to follow the surrender process by gradual methods, it doesn't work. It doesn't work to free the person immediately. Therefore, in the end of the 15th chapter, he declares that whoever knows me as a Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is to be understood as a knower of everything. Essence of all knowledge is to know Krishna. Vedaischa sarvair ahameva vedyam. And one who knows this is understood to be knower of everything. And therefore, knowing that, what does he do? What is his activity? He engages himself in full devotional service. So, sarvavit bhajati mam sarva bhavena. He engages in full devotional service. 16th chapter, he straight away talks about divine and demoniac nature. And in the divine nature, he describes those of divine nature. What is their most important characteristic of those of divine nature? So that is described. Tasmat Shastram Pramanam Te Karya Karya Vivastitau Jnatva Shastra Vidhanoktam Karma Kartum Iharhasi. One should understand what is duty and what is not duty by the regulations of the scriptures. Knowing such rules and regulations, one should act so that he may gradually be elevated. So Prabhupada describes in the purport that this purport is very important, the last purport here. In human society, aversion to the principles of understanding the Supreme Personality of God is the cause of all fall downs. That is the greatest offense of human life. Therefore, Maya, the material energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is always giving us trouble in the shape of the threefold miseries. This material energy, etc. So, Prabhupada says, ultimately, one has to surrender to the Supreme Lord. So, the essence is surrender to Krishna directly. And in the 17th chapter, the conclusion is that even though one may act in the mode of goodness, all such works performed in the mode of goodness should be dedicated to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is described as Om Tat Sat. And in the 18th chapter, he analyzes action itself. Because he says there is no difference between sannyasa and tyaga. Somebody may not accept the position of a renunciant as a sannyasi. Somebody may not accept sannyas according to the varnashrama system. But still, he can renounce the results of his activities and offer it to the Supreme Lord and thereby become as good as a sannyasi. So, Krishna says now that to renounce does not mean simply to renounce work, but renounce means renounce the fruits of action. He says something like that. There's one verse, I'm not getting that. And then he analyzes action in the mode of goodness, passion, ignorance, then worker in the mode of goodness, passion, ignorance. After all that, he comes to the conclusion that ultimately everybody will act according to the acquired nature. But the perfection is achieved by performing their prescribed duties when, by the result of their work, they engage in the worship of the Lord, who is the source of all beings and who is all pervading. Then only one can attain perfection. Then he says that how one can attain the highest stage of the perfectional, highest perfection of renunciation by simply acting in the way I will summarize. So 51 to 53, he describes how one can actually attain that transcendental platform by performing prescribed duties while worshipping the Lord, who is all pervading, and renouncing the fruits. But that is not easy. That's not easy. So, an easier method is to surrender to the Lord in the heart. Easier than to surrender to the Lord who's all pervading. To Brahman is easier than that is to surrender to the Paramatma, the Lord in the heart. But even more easier than that, and the easiest, is directly to surrender to Krishna. Easiest is to surrender to Krishna. Because in surrender to Krishna, he says, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. This is the most special thing about direct surrender to Krishna, complete surrender to Krishna. That Krishna will take charge of freeing one from all sinful reactions. One doesn't have to necessarily act in a way that will be like an atonement for some sinful activity is committed or will result in specific purification of some particular contamination. No need for all that. Simply you engage in my devotional service, you become my devotee, but most importantly, you surrender to me. I will actually free you from all sinful reaction. Do not fear. So Prabhupada says that this verse is actually the most important conclusion, instruction of the Supreme Lord in the entire Bhagavad Gita. So that surrender, Yayati was able to do in the end of his life. He was able to do that surrender. That is because he was engaging in his duty as a king, even though he was enjoying. But he was engaging in his duty by performing sacrifices to please the Supreme Lord Vasudeva. And he was taking care of his citizens like a father takes care of his children. At the same time, he was trying to squeeze out some enjoyment by enjoying with his wife. But finally, when he became disgusted with that enjoyment, then he had realization. What is it I'm doing? Why am I simply trying to squeeze out some pleasure from all this? And then the realization he had, he has expressed. And then he decided to completely surrender to the Supreme Lord after giving up everything else. Completely surrender after renouncing everything else, giving up everything else. So immediately he decided, I'm going to quit my position as the emperor of the world. So he handed over charge to his sons and placed Puru, who was the most qualified and eligible, as the emperor of the world. And he went away to the forest. And what did he do in the forest? Completely surrendered unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. And in this way, he was able to become free from all contamination of the material modes of nature. So Prabhupada says in this verse, the word vidhuta, meaning cleansed, is very significant. One can become cleansed very easily. One simply hears about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. This is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's specific recommendation. So the process of cleansing away, process of hearing and chanting the glory of the Supreme Lord washes away the dirty things accumulated in the core of the heart. A person trying to be perfectly Krishna conscious by hearing the words of Krishna from Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita certainly has all the dirty things cleansed from the core of his heart. Now this cleansing is special because as soon as one is cleansed from all dirty things, one's original position as an associate of the Lord is revealed. Swarupa Siddhi. Simply cleansing is not enough to reveal our position as the associate of the Lord. But cleansing through the process of bhakti, that results in revelation by Krishna that we are his personal associate. And that entitles us to be immediately transferred to Krishna's association as his personal associate. Lebhe gatim bhagavatim pratitaha. Whereas the Mayavadis, if they become completely cleansed by difficult austerities and cultivation of knowledge, they reach the spiritual sky, but they cannot go beyond that. The Ashtanga yogis, if they are non-devotees, they also reach the spiritual sky and they can't go beyond that. But the devotees, there is no question of devotees becoming purified and reaching the spiritual sky. They have nothing to do with the spiritual sky. They have nothing to do with any other planet in the material world. They simply are concerned with Krishna, the personality of Godhead, his personal abode, his devotional service, his devotees, his paraphernalia, everything connected with Krishna. So that is the destination. Krishna is the destination. So many places in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, my devotees attain my abode. Matstamstham adhigachyati. And some places Krishna says directly, they attain me. They attain me. Mamupetya. 15th chapter. 8th chapter, 15th verse. Mamupetya. Attain me. So, this confidential knowledge, there is no difference between Krishna, his abode, his pure devotees, his holy name, his devotional service, pure devotional service, absolute. That understanding is only possible when Krishna reveals his real nature, his personal nature. That's called Swarupa Siddhi. So, Yayati didn't have to practice any special yoga system. Simply he surrendered to Krishna completely, and it is Krishna's responsibility after that. Krishna just purified him and admitted him into his personal abode as his personal associate. He ultimately achieved the position of an associate of the Lord. So this is the most confidential thing about surrender to the Supreme Lord completely. That's why it says here, because King Yayati completely surrendered unto the Supreme Personality of God. This complete surrender is required. And that is what is the final thing in the Bhagavad Gita. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam raja. Aham tvam sarva papabhyo mokshachi. And before that, he has already said, if you become my devotee and engage in my service, mame vaishyasi satyante pratijane priyosi. So that is the destination of the devotees. They are automatically attain realization. They get revelation from Krishna, who they are, what is their position in relationship with Krishna, what is their specific relationship, what are the activities in that relationship. Everything is automatically taken care of. So I'll stop here. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada.